We turn now to Oklahoma Republican Congressman Tom Cole. Good morning.
Morning.
So you were the lead sponsor on Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan bills. And I know this was a big decision for the Speaker to hold the vote at all. The Polish Prime Minister tweeted, "Speaker Johnson, thank you. Better late than too late. And I hope it is not too late for Ukraine." How do you measure the cost of inaction over the past 6 months?
Well, first of all, the Senate only passed the bill 65 days ago. And it's not like the Speaker didn't have other ththings to do. He had to get all the appropriations done.
This is an emergency. They were running out of ammunition.
You know, and well, again, the administration waited a while. The Senate took a while. And we had other business underway. But it got done in a bipartisan way. He showed incredible leadership. And frankly, he gave us a rule, that is the structure in which we considered all these different matters, where every single member got to vote the way they wanted to on every single issue. That wasn't the case in the Senate. I think actually when they follow the example we have, you'll see more support for Ukraine than we probably saw in their original vote.
But to be fair, we're not talking about a policy debate that doesn't have a direct impact on the battlefield. I mean, the Supreme Allied Commander testified before Congress on April 10th, Ukrainians are being outshot by the Russian side 5-1 because of this debate.
Well,
the delay.
I'm sorry, democracy is kind of a messy business. And the reality is it's done. So it moved through. It moved through on a very bipartisan basis.
More Republicans voted against it than voted for it.
Well, look, it's about an even split. And quite frankly, if you want to look at the hardcore Republican opposition, go to the motion to recommit or look at the bill to strip funding from Ukraine. It's about 2-1, actually 3-1 on the motion to recommit. This is politics. There is such a thing as a vote no, hope yes crowd in every caucus. I can go down that list and tell you the members that said, okay, you got the votes, you don't need me. So I think there's actually much more. Well, it is a fun game. And look, it's politics. I'm not critical of anybody. The reality is we have overwhelming bipartisan support for each part of this package. It was structured in a way that it allowed members to both make the points they wanted to make and, frankly, if they needed political cover, do it. But it got done. So I'm pretty proud of the Speaker.
Well, I want to talk to you more on the other side of this break, but just you are in there acknowledging when you say vote no, hope yes, that there were Republicans who had to vote no because of the political pressure and the fight within your own party.
It's not, again, people
who wanted it to
You
pass.
think nobody makes political calculations in the United States Senate or in the administration?
Yeah.
Welcome to American politics. But the point is, look at the numbers. Look at overwhelming bipartisan numbers.
We're going to do that
over and over.
On the other side of this break. Stay here, please.
Got it.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Nation. We want to continue our conversation now with Oklahoma Republican Congressman Tom Cole. Congressman, before the break, we've been talking about this vote the House had yesterday to approve the $95 billion package. There was a decision here for Speaker Johnson that was an important one. He basically put his job on the line. As we know, there's this movement among House conservatives led by Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene to try to oust him from power, in part because this Ukraine aid bill. Do you think this is a real threat to his leadership?
Well, I take anything seriously, but no, I don't. Look, I think it's a relatively small number of Republican members, frankly, just as it was in McCarthy's case. There were only 8 people.
Exactly.
But the point is, I don't think there's unified Democratic support. There was unified Democratic support to remove the Speaker. I think both sides have now seen how dangerous this is, how irresponsible it is. And quite frankly, I think it's unlikely that Democrats who supported Ukraine, not as many supported Israel as we would have liked, but they did support Ukraine. I think they're unlikely to remove the Speaker over that. Although, to be fair, they removed McCarthy after he did what he asked them to do, which was keep the government funded. But again, I don't think that's going to happen in this case. But if somebody wants to do it, it's within the rules and they can take their shot.
But what you're saying there is that Democrats you trust would protect Speaker Johnson from being ousted because frankly, they wouldn't vote.
I don't think you'd lose very many Republicans. We didn't lose very many Republicans with McCarthy. So it doesn't take very many Democrats to either not vote or oppose it. And frankly, I don't think we'd lose the same number of Republicans that we lost with Kevin McCarthy. I think even people that disagree with the Speaker...
You wouldn't get to 8 Republicans.
I don't
They've gotten
think
to
so.
3.
Look,
Marjorie
I
Taylor
think
Greene's
there's a
3.
lot of people that like this Speaker, that respect this Speaker, even when they disagree with him. They know he's honest, he's a straight shooter. They also had a taste of what it's like to go without a Speaker for 3 weeks. I don't think they want that again. I certainly don't think they want it close to an election.
Former Speaker Gingrich said, the demons that Matt Gaetz unleashed by going after Kevin McCarthy are still out there. You can't govern by shooting yourself in the head every day. How does Speaker Johnson get anything done?
Well, first of all, he just got a lot done. He's gotten every appropriations bill passed. He's gotten FISA through. He just got this consequential...
But he has to rely on Democratic votes, which he's being
that's fine.
faulted for by
honestly,
members of his party.
No, every appropriations bill is bipartisan at the end of the day. They just work that way. So most of these, and something like FISA ought to be bipartisan. I actually think he's, empowered the center and marginalized the extremes on each side. Now, is there some risk with that? Sure. But the point is, he's gotten a lot done. I think people admire him. They genuinely like him. They all respect him. Every single Republican voted for him. I don't think that any other person could have done that at the time other than Mike Johnson. So the reservoir of goodwill is enormous. I think he's much stronger than the people seem to think. And I think he's demonstrated that by what he's passed.
First of all, do you think Republicans after November will have the majority?
I
and
do.
If so, he could be reelected.
I do, because I think we're likely to win the presidency. I think this is pretty simple. I used to do politics for a living. I guess I still do. But the reality is the person that wins the presidency is probably going to take the House. It's close enough that probably makes a difference. I think we'll win. So I think we will have the House.
All right. Congressman, good to have you here.
Great privilege. Thank you.
In person. We'll be right back. Overnight, Israeli Defense Forces launched a deadly series of airstrikes on the city of Rafah in southern Gaza. But there's also been an uptick of violence in the West Bank. Our Deborah Pata reports.
Every 10 minutes, a child is killed in Gaza, says the United Nations. That's nearly 15,000 children in almost 7 months. Here, paramedics rushed to save the injured after yet another Israeli airstrike in Rafah. For this little girl, it was too late. Her grief-stricken father is inconsolable. He is not alone. In this room, there are only the bodies of children. Overnight, at least 10 more names added to that endless list of horror, the youngest just 2 years old. Our CBS News team in Gaza reports that among the dead was a pregnant woman. Miraculously, doctors saved her baby girl. Here, Israel Defense Force soldiers prepare for a mission. But this is not in Gaza. It's IDF footage of a 2-day operation in the West Bank city of Tulkarem, where they say they have been rooting out militants. At least 14 Palestinians were killed. The IDF pulled out last night, leaving this massive destruction in its wake. It's on a scale residents say they've never seen before. This morning, they were mopping up the damage. Israeli soldiers used bulldozers to smash through the area, destroying streets, buildings and infrastructure. The West Bank has reached boiling point. Nearly 500 Palestinians have been killed since October 7th, and there are ongoing clashes with Israeli settlers, which escalated after a 14-year-old settler was found dead over a week ago. The U.S. has imposed new sanctions on West Bank settlers, and a U.S. official told CBS News that since 2022, it's been investigating an IDF unit of ultra-Orthodox soldiers accused of human rights atrocities, with an announcement expected this week. The unit is stationed here in the West Bank. Media reports suggesting it could be blacklisted from receiving U.S. military aid prompted an angry outburst from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who said any sanctions imposed on the IDF would be a moral low when it is fighting in Gaza.
That was our Deborah Pata. And we're joined now by New York Times White House and national security correspondent David Sanger. His latest book, New Cold Wars, is out now. David, good to see you again.
Great to be with you, Margaret.
Where do we begin? The world truly is on fire. And one of the things I like about your book is you write, going all the way back to listening to the Nixon-Kennedy debates and hearing those candidates hash out America's role in the world and geostrategy. In this election, we don't even know if the candidates will have a debate. Meanwhile, the world's on fire. How do the members of the American public need to think about the global competition the United States is in the middle of?
Well, it's a very different competition than what we had in the Cold War. Those Nixon-Kennedy debates were, at the height of the moment of a U.S. contest against the Soviet Union, which was terrifying and nuclear. But there was a simplicity about it. There was a predictability about it. We understood who controlled their nuclear weapons. They understood who controlled ours. We knew who to call. The new Cold Wars are quite different, Margaret. We've got Russia and China coming together in a periodic partnership. I wouldn't say it's a full alliance. We have other players like Iran and North Korea, as you were discussing with earlier guests, supplying them, becoming sort of what the Iranians call an axis of resistance to the U.S. It is a far more volatile, I think far more dangerous period than we had even then. And yet, as you point out, our ability to discuss it as a nation has somewhat degraded. You watch those Kennedy-Nixon debates and put aside who was sweating and who looked young and vigorous and all that. It was an incredibly sophisticated argument, largely about nuclear deterrence. Mm-hmm. I'm afraid that we're not having that incredibly sophisticated argument today, 60 years, more than 60 years later. But the vote yesterday, which you've been discussing about Ukraine, at the end of the day, turned out to be a fairly overwhelming vote in favor of the U.S. pushing against the Russians in Ukraine and perhaps beyond.
Certainly overwhelmingly yes for Democrats, a bit split for
a majority of Republicans voted against, but
yes.
it passed comfortably.
It did. And I think it's such an interesting point you make, though, in sort of changing how we think about competition with Russia and China. We learned Friday that the U.S. is likely to lose a significant counterterrorism base in the African country of Niger because the government demanded troops withdraw. I think a lot of Americans didn't even know that there were 1,000 U.S. troops there fighting or working in the counterterrorism space. Russia's moving in.
That's right.
China is getting and carving out a large amount of influence in Africa. What are the fronts in the new Cold War?
Well, there are a couple of different ones. You point out one in Africa, also an area that China has been wiring up with Huawei equipment and so forth. So we are concerned, rightly so, that the U.S., in not having a competitor straight on to put in 5G equipment, may be losing the opportunity to help bind the continent together. In the book, I take you to the Solomon Islands, a place the U.S. fought for in World War II and scored a big victory, but now has basically moved over into China's camp. There's still some contest underway. But to answer your question more broadly, if you believe that there is something of a new Iron Curtain coming down, a place where you're going to divide the U.S., the NATO nations against China, Russia, Iran, others, it's somewhere in that borderland between Ukraine and Russia. Mm-hmm. And that's why the bill that went through Congress was so important. I don't know if it's enough to turn the tide. The Ukrainians may have lost so much time and ammunition here that it may be too late. But certainly had it not passed, that was pretty much by the judgment of the CIA director, Bill Burns, and others, going to be the end of the contest. The Russians almost certainly would have surged forward.
And China has made clear they have a stake in Russia winning in Ukraine. It is.
That's right.
This
And
competition.
If we had those debates again, and as you say, who knows if we will, I think the most interesting...
Or even those interviews.
Or even, that's right.
Substantial interviews with conversations about national security interests of America. I mean...
That's right. And,
we should.
And President Biden has been reluctant to have, major sit-down interviews, at least with the print organizations. But I think if we did have those interviews, I think one of the big questions is, what is your plan to get in the midst of the Russia-China combination, because the core of what Nixon and Kissinger were doing in the early 70s in recognizing China was to prevent Russia and China from coming together.
You also make this interesting point about the dynamic that's so different given, first of all, they're so economically intertwined, the United States and China, but also the business community and technology and the role it plays in this version of competition. A top U.S. cyber official told you companies, not the U.S. government, have all the insight these days. How do we know when an attack's coming?
Yeah, the book opens with the days running up to the war in Ukraine. And while there were certainly lots of indicators coming from American satellites and signals intelligence and so forth, in the end, one of the key indicators that the Russians were getting ready to roll came from Microsoft, whose engineers were noticing that malware that had been placed by the Russians on Ukrainian government agencies were being activated and sent a notice through their channels that ultimately went to the White House. At the end of the day, what kept Ukraine running was some combination of Microsoft and Amazon moving all of their data to the cloud, and then Elon Musk coming in and providing Starlink so they could communicate to that cloud.
Incredible.
Something we never saw in the old Cold Wars.
David, it's a fascinating read. It's good to see you in person, and we'll have to leave it there.
Thank you.
Pennsylvania's Governor Josh Shapiro standing by waiting for us. We'll be right back. We go now to the Democratic governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro. He joins us this morning from Abington, Pennsylvania. And Governor, thank you for sticking with us. We've been having some transmission technical issues, so hopefully we don't get interrupted. I'll get straight to it.
I look forward to the conversation. Thanks.
I'll get straight to it, Governor. You have been outspoken against the rising and troubling anti-Semitism in this country. I know the FBI director said just a few days ago that federal law enforcement is concerned about lone actors targeting gatherings ahead of the start of Passover, which starts tomorrow. Are there known threats in your state?
Well, there's not known threats right now, and I can tell you the Pennsylvania State Police, working in coordination with our federal and local partners, are all over this, and will let folks know in communities if there are specific threats. But we continue to work closely with law enforcement and community leaders to do everything we can to take down the temperature, to address the rise in anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, other forms of hate. There should be no place for that here in Pennsylvania. Of course, Pennsylvania founded on the vision of William Penn, a place that would be a place of tolerance and welcome and peace, a place where people could come together and practice their faith, whatever their faith is. We have a special relationship with that here in this Commonwealth, where we respect all, no matter what you look like, where you come from, who you love, or who you choose to pray to. And we're going to continue to do everything we can to make sure everyone feels protected in this Commonwealth.
Well, there should be no place for it anywhere in America, and I know you agree with that. Let me get to the politics of the moment. President Biden won the state of Pennsylvania in 2020 narrowly. He spent a lot of time in your state this past week. We've seen in our polling his approval rating among young voters aged 18 to 29 has dropped 12 points since February, from 55% to 43% today. How does the president get that back?
I think the president gets it back by doing exactly what he's doing, showing up, talking about his record, addressing things like climate change, which are incredibly important issues for young voters, along with many others, obviously. Making sure that young people feel included in the conversation, not just as a vote, but as part of the governing coalition going forward. Young people helped propel me to victory as governor. One of the first things I did was start what I believe is the first ever Next Gen Engagement Commission here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, a place where young people quite literally advise me on policy, meet with me regularly, give me their perspective on what's happening in the community. I think part of the frustration by young people is that they oftentimes don't feel heard. They feel like their voices and their votes are taken advantage of come election time. This is a moment where the young people deserve to be at the table. And the fact that the president's showing up in these communities and talking about these issues that are going to help young people in the future, I think is a really important step.
So last weekend, Donald Trump was campaigning in Pennsylvania. It's so key. Here's what he said.
Biden has imposed a savage natural gas export ban that's putting countless Pennsylvania jobs at risk. He's risking your lives. He's risking your jobs. But he doesn't care because all he cares about is the Green New Scam.
He is speaking to real fear among some of your constituents about President Biden's decision to, at least temporarily, put a pause on new natural gas projects. How do you respond to that?
Look, I've been very clear with the White House and publicly. I hope that this pause that they put in place is very quick and then we move forward. Here in Pennsylvania, our energy economy has powered this nation, and it has done so over many generations. And going forward, I think Pennsylvania has an opportunity to be the center of the clean energy economy. Thanks to the president, we're the only state in the nation with 2 regional hydrogen hubs.
But
thanks to the president, we've been able to work together.
Sorry, you broke up at the beginning. I think you said you've been very clear to the White House that you hope this is a short pause. Does that mean you agree it is costing your state jobs and money?
Well, I think if the pause goes on for a long time, it has the potential to cost us jobs. That's why I want this to be as quick as possible. And what I went on to say, though, is we have an opportunity here in Pennsylvania to be the center of the clean energy economy. Thanks to President Biden, we have 2 regional hydrogen hubs. Thanks to President Biden, we are capping methane emissions from abandoned wells. We have billions of dollars of tax credits and other resources coming from the Department of Energy to help us through a transition. Here in Pennsylvania, we're showing that we can both protect the jobs that exist today and create more energy jobs tomorrow. Energy is critical to the future of our Commonwealth. Now listen, the bravado and the bluster from the former president do nothing to actually create jobs in Pennsylvania. He's got an abysmal track record when it comes to that. President Biden has a strong record, and we're going to continue to lead on energy here in Pennsylvania.
You mentioned young voters and how key the issue of climate is to them. The Biden administration touts the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, as a green energy bill, even though it wasn't named that. But CBS polling shows half of Americans have not heard much or nothing at all about what the administration has done. Only 14% say they've heard a lot. 2/3 don't know if their state has gotten federal funds for climate change projects. This seems a real vulnerability for Democrats when it comes to young voters.
Let me be very clear. Climate change is real, it is serious, and we have to address it. And Joe Biden understands that. Donald Trump has made fun of climate change and denies its existence. So there's a clear contrast in this race because of the federal dollars that have flowed to Pennsylvania. As I mentioned a moment ago, we are positioned to get 2 regional hydrogen hubs that are going to help us combat climate change. We're addressing all kinds of infrastructure needs here in this Commonwealth, from repairing roads and bridges to making sure people are connected to the internet, to making sure families in Esplin, which is a predominantly minority community in Pittsburgh, no longer need to drink water out of the lines that contain lead, thanks to Joe Biden cleaning that up. So when it comes to infrastructure investments, when it comes to the kind of investments that are going to help spur on a clean energy economy, President Biden has been there. Now, we have to make that case, and we've got to make sure folks understand that and hear that. That's why you run a campaign. That's why you'll see stark differences when it comes to combating climate change between the policies of President Biden and what Donald Trump has done in the past and wants to do in the future.
But the messaging needs work, is what you're saying.
Well, I think the case needs to be made. There's a wonderful track record. There's a wonderful body of work. They need to make that case, and I'll be helping make that case alongside the president.
I want to ask about something that has been really damaging your state, and that is drug addiction. Pennsylvania has, the #1 public health crisis in Pennsylvania, according to the state, is opioids. The CDC says Pennsylvania recently saw the highest number of xylazine-related deaths in the country. What is driving the addiction?
Listen, 13 Pennsylvanians die every single day from an opioid overdose. It is unacceptable. And here in Pennsylvania, we're trying to come at it with a multi-pronged approach. First, we have to understand that drug addiction is a disease, not a crime. Now, we have to invest in law enforcement, and we've increased the number of state troopers by 400, and I'm looking to add another 400. As Attorney General, I arrested over 8,000 drug dealers. So we're not going soft on those who are peddling these poisons in our community. But we also have to make sure the treatment is available. As Attorney General, I led a national coalition that ended up holding those drug companies accountable. The very people that brought this crisis into our communities and brought $2 billion back to Pennsylvania for treatment.
I'm
this
sorry
is really
to
critical
interrupt you.
stuff, and it's going to require a multi-pronged approach.